The first thing that we need to look at in regards to a workflow is that we need to go into we got to look at a diagram of the way that we need to work. So I'm going to pull up here on the computer a diagram, and this is our workflow. And by the way, all the diagrams that I'm showing here are available to those who purchase the course. So you guys will have access to these. Just download them. They're on the course page. So don't worry about trying to write this down or screen capture it. You can certainly download it later once you have access to the course. But this is the typical workflow for the wedding photographer. And as you look at it, you can see that you start with your images in the CF card. So things are in the CF card and they're going to be brought down into the working drive. The working drive, and we're going to talk about that. Let's come back to the camera here and let me show you some hard drives here so that you can see what I'm talking about when I'm working. First off, we need a working drive that's separated from our computer. And that doesn't matter who you are. Doesn't matter if you're a professional or if you're non-professional. You need to have a drive that is dedicated to photographs. So the drive that's dedicated to photographs can be a traveling drive or it can be a drive that sits on your desk. But either way, it needs to be something that's separated from your drive. So the first drive that we'll look at here is what's called a Tough Tech Duo. And so this is a traveling drive. It's a small piece of gear, but it's a very special piece of gear. It's called a RAID 1 hard drive. A RAID 1 hard drive is essentially two drives that are tied together, but they can be removed separately. When I put information onto drive number 1, and what camera are we on here? I'm going to turn this, and if you can zoom in on that, you can see that there are two drives. There's drive number 1, which is where all of the information goes. That's kind of your main drive. Drive number 2 is a secondary drive. It's an exact copy of drive number 1. So when I put something on drive number 1, it goes to drive number 2 instantaneously. It's happening at the same time. So I immediately have two copies. It's not like I put it on this drive and then I have to remember to copy it over to this drive, which is a lot of people do that to back up their stuff. Or they rely on Lightroom to, when they import it, to send it to two different places. Or, worst case scenario, they put it on one drive and then they have some kind of a backup program that does every week or something like that, and it backs it up to another drive, or they never do it. But this does it instantaneously, so I have two immediate copies of that drive. Now, the beauty of this drive is that hot swappable, I can, while it's on, so let me just see if I'm locked or not, I can push on this little button here and I can open up this drive. I have just removed the drive. It's still on, it's still accessed on my computer. Anything I write to this drive will be written to drive number 1, obviously not to drive number 2. All I need to do in order to be really, really backed up is inside of my little drive case here, I have a third exact copy of this drive. So it's the same size. I simply take this drive, I plug it in like this. So this is drive number 3. I'm going to put this in and I'm going to do that. Now, immediately, and we got to look at it now, it says, do you want me to add this disk? I hit yes, and it immediately goes to rebuild drive number 3. So now it's taking everything that's on drive number 1 and it's rebuilding it onto drive number 3. Drive number 2 is now a perfect copy of what we've just done. Simply put it into my case, And now I've got a separate drive that I can take home so that it's not at the studio. Or if I'm traveling, and this is where this comes in handy, is when I'm working on a RAID 1 system that's this small, I can take this drive with me. All of my photos go on this drive, and as soon as I'm done with the job, so if I'm traveling in Europe or something like that and I've done a wedding, I don't want to lose those files, so I simply swap out that third drive. This can be FedExed home, this can be carried home, and I've separated out the information. So I've done my absolute best to make sure I don't lose any files. Now, what does that look like for the person who is just doing it for fun and just at home and it's just personal files? It's simple. You simply buy a RAID 1 system. This one's called the ToughTech Duo, and it's made by CRU. You can get it at B&H Photo. And by the way, anything that I'll mention here, I've got a list of all of the equipment that I use and the different products that I use. If you go to jaredplatt.com/CreativeLive, there's a list of all the gear. So that'll help you find it, and I've got links to it and stuff like that. So that's jaredplatt.com/CreativeLive. So for those of you who are working on personal work and it's never leaving the home, or you're just doing your kids or whatever, at that point you simply follow the same process, but instead of FedExing this home because you're in Europe or someplace, you simply take this drive and put it in your safe deposit box, put it in a fireproof safe, separate it from this drive so that should this drive be stolen from your home or should this drive be burned in a fire, this one is safe somewhere away from this drive. And if you're not updating your photos all that often, maybe you could swap it out once a week. I swap this out once a day. So as I leave, I simply swap the drive. That means everything I've worked on that day is now duplicated and taken off-site. And so that's how I work. Let me show you a photo really quickly, and then I'll get to your question. If we go to, hold on. Okay, so this is, actually, let me show you a different photo. There we go. So this is a Pelican case, and in that Pelican case is little slots for hard drives. And so I have a backup of various things. And that Pelican case is my briefcase that goes home with me every night. When I come back to the office in the morning, I bring my Pelican case, and then as I leave the office for the day, I simply swap out all the drives, whatever backup drives I need to make. And a lot of the times I only have to swap one because it's just the working drive that's changed. But if like an archive has changed or a portfolio has changed, I just simply swap out the drive and then lock it up, take it home. And so I have 4 different backups that happen on various levels. The working drive gets changed every single day. The portfolio drive and the archive of the current year get changed once in a while. And then I have a little tiny small drive that backs up my laptop. And every once in a while I just back it up, just to make sure that if this were to crash, I would have the ability to just kind of reinstall it on a new laptop without having to go through all the effort of getting everything situated. And that's it. But if I take those home with me every day, then I'm secure. If I'm not a professional, then it's just a matter of choosing an appropriate time to swap the drive out. Now remember, it's just swapping a drive. That's the most brainless activity you can do. Simply grab this, swap the drive, walk away, and you're done. And you have done all your due diligence to make sure you're backed up. And then from then on out, it's just play with your photos. So professional or non-professional, it's the same process. Now, you can either use the ToughTech Duo, which is made by CRU. It's super tough, super rugged, can travel anywhere. Or you could use a larger RAID 1 system like this one. This is also made by CRU. And we'll talk about this big daddy later. But this is it. It's just 2 drives, same thing. Simply pop this drive out, plug in the the other drive, but this drive is different because it is a 3.5-inch drive. These are laptop-sized drives. These are full-size drives. These cost less. So if you want to limit the amount of cost of your hard drive, you can get bigger hard drives for less price if you go with a 3.5-inch drive. But if you travel at all, or if you just want things to be small and compact, then this is the way to go. But it's a little more costly to get the drives themselves. The units are not very costly at all, but the drives themselves, that's where your expense is in buying these drives. So, okay, you had a question.
Just a quick one. What's the storage on the drives for the Tough Tech?
Okay, so the Tough Tech will, I don't know that it has a limit on any specific size. I run a 1.5 terabyte on, I have two of these. I have a 1.5 terabyte on one, and then this one has 500 gigabyte solid state drives. And the reason that this is my traveling drive, and I keep everything solid state on the traveling drive because if I drop it, I don't want that to destroy the whole thing. You take a spinning drive with a little needle in it, and you drop that drive, or even sometimes just this far, and it can throw that little needle out of whack, and then you're in trouble. And so these are all solid state. That way, if there's any bumping or what, because they're going in a backpack, so it's really important for them to have like the best possible. So they're not going to just die from like a jar or something like that. Okay? All right. So let us go back to our diagram here. Let's see, where's the right diagram? Yes?
Where did you get the cases for those? The black cases?
CRU also sells the black cases. So they're super, and they make them for the little ones too. Quite frankly, I wish all of my drives were this because they're so, these are all like little tiny, this is a solid state drive. So, you know, I'm not worried that that could just destroy a hard drive, but it won't destroy this. So, not that you should throw these around, but I'm just saying. Okay, so let's go back. So, in our workflow, we are going from our card, our camera card, we are going into the working drive. So that would be this thing right here or this thing right here, depending on whether you're traveling or whether you're going, you know, at home. You're going to go into the working drive, and then that, whatever you're putting into the working drive is going into the spot where it belongs. Too many people use pretty convoluted ways of putting stuff in. And one of the most convoluted ways that you can put images into your system is through Lightroom. Because most people, when they put stuff in through Lightroom, they don't know where it's putting it. That's the key, is knowing where your files are. So let me show you, if I go to a working drive, and I open up that working drive, you can see where my files are. They're right here. So I'm inside the working drive, and there is a job. So let's go down to Jackson's baseball portraits, which I haven't imported, but I've put them in a folder. You can see that that folder is named 2015-04-23, because that's when I shot it. Then it's Platt, because I'm the client, and then Jackson's baseball portraits. So that's the file name. Then, if I go a little bit further over, you'll see that I've got a raw folder, and inside that raw folder is a card. See how it says EOS Digital? That means I dragged a card into there. And by the way, if you're going to copy a card, the fastest way to copy a card, plug that into your computer, grab the card. Let's pretend this is a card. If you grab the card and you drag it, see that little arrow? That's going to make what's called an alias or a shortcut. That is not copying the information. But if you hold down the Option or the Alt key, that little plus symbol says, I'm going to copy it all. So the fastest way to bring something in is plug in your card, grab the card, simply hit the Option key, and then drag it in and let it go. And now everything will be copied into your folder just like that. So you don't have to worry about like digging in and opening it up and finding the files and then highlighting the files and then copying, hitting copy and then paste. Just simply grab it, hold the Option key, and drag it. So as we go through this workflow, you're going to see then that we have, in the workflow, we see working drive. Everything goes into the job folder, into the raw folder. And then I always use one card or one folder per card. The reason I do that is so that if I'm bringing in 15 different cards, I'm bringing them all in at the same time because I'm actually using two of these Lexar card readers. And so my camera is shooting 2 different cards. So it's shooting a CF card and an SD card because it's a Mark III, a 5D Mark III, so it's got the slots for 2 different cards. And so I can draw all of those in at the same time. And if I have 2 of these connected, I have 4 cards that are ingesting into the computer at the same time. So in order to, and that's a Lexar card reader, in order to be able to avoid cross-naming, so if I have an assistant that's shooting and I'm shooting, and then there's a file number 5 and a file number 5, if they hit at the same place in the same folder, it's going to stop the process. So I just simply make a folder per card that I'm shooting. And so if I wanted to do that, I simply go into the raw folder. Now this only had 1 card to this job, so I just drag the 1 card in. But when I have multiple cards in a job, I go into this little thing right here, changes this into a list view. Once I'm in the list view, the command Shift Command N makes a bunch of new folders. So if I have 15 folders, I just do this 15 times. This would be a very long shoot, but you know. Okay, so once I've made enough folders for my shoot, this was a really intense portrait. This is what people who don't know what they're doing, they have to shoot this many shots to get one good shot. So fortunately, I'm not that person, so I'm going to delete these. There we go. But you get the concept. So now I'm going to, once the images are inside of the working drive, where they need to be, I know where they are because I put them there. Do you see the difference? Don't let something else put your photos somewhere where you don't know where they are. You take them, you make a folder with the name of whatever it is you were doing. If you're traveling, so if I'm traveling and it's personal work, I'm going to put in the date of the travel. If it's a month-long travel, then it's going to be 2015-0400, which tells me there is no day. It is a month of travel, or it is within that month, or maybe it's, if it's a year, I would put 2015-00000, you know, it would be just, that's the whole year, so that I know exactly what I've shot. Then I know, for me it's the client. If it's all personal, then the client section would be not all that important, but maybe you could say travel, and then you could say, instead of a subject, you could say travel-Italy, something like that. But come up with your own nomenclature, but always follow it. For those of you who are professionals, if you do personal work, the personal work gets the same treatment as a job. There is no difference. You notice that when you look at my son, his portrait shoot, which is not professional, it's still following exactly the same rules. And the reason for that is that if you don't follow exactly the same rules, you will drop balls. You will lose things because you will not know what workflow am I following. Just follow the same workflow. It works good for professionals, non-professionals alike. Okay? All right, so once we are done ingesting the files into the hard drive, regardless of what hard drive we're using, whether it's a desktop or it's a travel drive, it's a separated drive. Now we need to put those images into a Lightroom catalog. Putting them into a Lightroom catalog is as simple as telling Lightroom to import, and I'll show you that in a minute. Once we import those images into the Lightroom catalog, what has happened is Lightroom looks at the folder of images. It sees all of the images, it reads them, it looks at the raw data inside the images, it pulls it into its own database. And in the database, it records where the file is, what its name is, and what data is inside it. That's it. That's all Lightroom does. Takes a snapshot of it. It makes a little JPEG for you to look at so that you can see it, and then it shows it to you. And if you adjust it, it's not adjusting the file. The file stays the same. It's non-destructive editing. The file stays the same. And what's happening is inside of Lightroom's catalog system, it is then making computational notes as to, I want to turn this to black and white, and if I were to increase it by 2 stops exposure, it would look like this. And if I added a curve, it would look like that. And it's constantly making these notes, but the actual photo is not changing. Just what's inside the catalog. So it's just like its brain. That's its brain. And so the same way I can see all of you, and I know that you two have blonde hair, you have dark hair, but I can close my eyes and I can imagine what would happen if I shaved your head, you got dark hair, and then you got her hair and nice long blonde flowy hair, right? And now I can see that picture in my head, but it hasn't changed you at all, okay? It's just in my head, in my sick brain. That's what's going on. But it's what keeps me awake. Just so you know. So that's what Lightroom's doing. It is taking a snapshot of you or of the photo, and then it is switching things around and saying, what ifs? The only time something changes on the photo is when you export the photo. Once you export, then it has to take the information that it decided to do to the photo, and it applies it to a new image on the way out. All right? So that's the only time it changes. Otherwise, there is no way you can destroy an image, which means that you can play to your heart's content all the time, because you can always go back to square one. You'll never destroy an image. In fact, it's really hard to actually lose an image in Lightroom, because if you hit the delete key, it still asks you, do you really want to delete this, or do you just want to remove it from the catalog? So it's very, very sensitive about that. Doesn't want to lose anything. Okay, so once we have it inside of the catalog, then we're going to run it through its paces and do the things that we want to do to it. And you'll see that inside of the workflow here. You can see inside of working Lightroom catalog, as you go through that, you will see that the first thing that we do is we build one-for-one previews. I'll show you how to do that. And by the way, this is a 30,000 foot view, so don't get fearful that we're going too fast for you. I'm going to give you the scope of what we're doing, and then we're going to show you how to do it all. So we're going to build one-for-one previews so that we can see all of the information that's available to us. We might have to adjust the capture times. We'll show you how to do that. We're going to select the images. We're going to organize them. We're going to keyword them. We're going to adjust the images. We're going to reorganize the images. We're going to rename the images so that then they have a rational name rather than what came out of the camera. Then we're going to do any kind of Photoshop edits maybe that we want to do. And then once we've done that, then we can start doing other things with the images. We can export the images up to a cloud so that our clients can see them, or post them on Facebook or something like that. We can make proof books because we have an entire book module inside of Lightroom that we'll show you how to use. We're going to maybe make some album pre-designs for clients. Maybe if you're traveling, maybe it's a travel book that you're doing, or maybe it's an art book that you're doing. I'm going to get rid of all the rejected images. The things that we didn't use, I'm going to throw them away. If it's personal work, they're going to be gone. They literally are going to be trashed. If it is client work where I'm afraid that I could be sued for losing something of theirs, I will put it in what's called a rejects drive. The rejects drive is simply a drive, and I'll show you that right here. So I have a little tiny rejects drive that I brought with me right here, just for show purposes. My actual rejects drive is a 3.5 inch. But this would be your rejects drive. Your rejects drive is a temporary solution. Simply put the rejects on this drive and wait until this drive is full. Once the drive is full, then you can delete the old rejects and start putting new rejects on it. It just cycles through. You don't keep them forever. You keep them long enough that maybe you have a 6-month window. That way that the client hasn't complained in 6 months, they're fine with it, right? So I simply, and that's what this big unit here is for. This big unit here is it's called a JBOD system, J-B-O-D, JBOD. And it holds 4 units. Each one is independent. So it's not copying things. It's not like a RAID 1 system where it's making duplicates and stuff like that. It literally is just 4 bays. If I plug something in bay 1, it shows up on my computer. If I plug something in bay 2, it also shows up on my computer, which allows me, and I have this very unit at home or at my studio, where I can plug in drives. That way, if I want to, I can copy stuff to the rejects drive. At the same time, I'm copying stuff over to the archive. I can move stuff around. If I want to, I can plug an archive drive in plus a backup, and then I can tell my system to back it up. So it's just an independent drive system. It's like taking a bunch of, does anyone remember Lexar drives, those silver standing up drives? It's like having a bunch of those, but not all the cords and and have to buy a new housing with every single one, and it costs you 3 times as much to buy the drive, and then you have to plug it in and plug that in, and you've got a mess of cords hanging out. This is simply one drive system that sits on your desk or below your desk, and you simply just plug stuff in as needed. The beauty of it is buying a 3.5-inch, buying a 3.5-inch drive like this doesn't cost hardly anything. Buying a 3.5-inch drive, this same drive with a housing around it, costs you 2 to 3 times as much. So invest in a system like this, or even a smaller system. It doesn't matter what system. They have just one drive alone, just sits on your desk, and you can plug things in and out. The important thing is that you invest in a system that allows you just from then on out to use independent drives, because that's the least costly way to get your information in and out of things. So once we're done removing all of the rejects, now we have, because I shoot a job that's this big, and by the time I'm done getting rid of the trash, it's this big. So we get rid of all those rejects, delete them, and then I've got a job that's a manageable size, and that job then needs to be archived, because I've run it through and done all the things I want to do to it. So at that point, I'm going to convert all of the final images to DNG. Now, some people convert them to DNG on the way in to Lightroom, and that's fine, but you're just converting thousands of images when you're really only going to finish up using hundreds of images. So I convert them at the end. That way I'm not doing it at the beginning. So I convert them to DNG, and the purpose of converting to DNG is several reasons. The first reason is that the DNG file type is a raw image, so it's same advantage as my CR2s or the NEFs or the whatever kind of raw file you're shooting. But the DNG contains all of the information that Lightroom has used during the adjustments and the flags and the stars, and all of that kind of stuff is inside that. So now instead of a raw image with has anyone ever seen a Sidecar file? If you've worked in Bridge or Photoshop, Camera Raw, anything like that, and you've adjusted something, then when you do that, it can't write the information into a raw image. So it puts a little sidecar file. So you'll have image number 9.cr2, which is the raw file, and then you'll have image number 9. I don't remember what the XML. There you go, XML. And that is the sidecar file that says, hey, this is what I did to it. These are the edit notes. Problem with that is if you lose the edit notes, you lost all your work. So the DNG puts it all together, which is great because then that file can go anywhere and it won't lose its edit notes. You can move it around, you can send it to a friend, whatever, and you will have the edit notes inside of it. When you re-import it into Lightroom or open it in Photoshop, both of them will see what you did. And then all of that information comes in. So if you create DNGs for all your RAWs at the end. Then if for some reason you were to take that to another catalog, or if you were to just decide to open it up in Photoshop all on its own, all of the information is already there, the keywords, the stars, the adjustments, and it knows what it looked like the last time you were in Lightroom. So that's one advantage. The other advantage is that a lot of people will ask me, well, is there a way to have like a big catalog that looks at all the little catalogs? And there isn't. But if everything is a DNG, then your entire system or bridge can search every drive that happens to be attached to your computer, and all the keywords are available. So if I search keywords, I will find DNGs that have that information in them. And that's the way we find our photos outside of Lightroom. Very easy to find as long as they're DNGs, or PSDs or JPEGs or TIFFs, because those files you can write the information directly into them. It's just the raw files that Lightroom doesn't have access to them, and so it leaves them alone. All right? Okay, so we save them as DNGs, and then we're going to export them as a catalog as well. And the reason we want to export them as a catalog is so that they have their own little catalog. Now, I failed to mention at the beginning, and I think that maybe it's important to go back and talk about that, and that is the working catalog. Notice that when we put the images into the working drive, we then imported into what I call a working catalog. That is what you're seeing, here. That's what you're seeing here, is a working catalog. Notice that there are more than one job in the working catalog. Each one has its name, who it was shot for, and what it is. So here's a travel file. So Platt I'm the client, and it was in Budapest for a workshop that we did. The next one is Blazard. That's the senior, and then it's a senior portrait. So we have a working catalog where all things come in and get worked on, and then they leave when they're done. It doesn't keep building, it just comes in, you work on it, you leave. That's the professional version. If you're an amateur or an enthusiast or a mom taking pictures of kids, you may not have enough photos to be churning, images into a working catalog and then get rid of them. Maybe one catalog is fine for you. And so if that's the case, then all images will come into one catalog and they will stay there, and the bad ones will just get deleted. So they come in, delete the bad ones, and it just gets incrementally bigger. The funny thing about that is when you have a catalog that's a personal type catalog, it'll get really big and then you'll delete a lot. And then it'll get really big and then you'll delete a lot. And then it'll get really big and then you'll delete a lot. Because you just came home from France. Now I went through the photos, right? And if you follow that as you do a personal type of workflow, then that'll work as well. And in these schematics, I actually have a personal workflow here. Let's see. There it is. So if I were doing personal work and I was not doing big volume, then I would work this way, where the images go into my drive. They're getting backed up to that rotating third copy. But the photos are all inside this drive, and the rejects get thrown into, what is that? Toilet. That's the toilet, universal symbol for the toilet. But everything's still organized the same way. It's still organized the way that we organize our professional jobs. We put them into folders that tell us where they are. That kind of stuff still stays the same. The only difference is that we don't need to be sending, archived full jobs out, because the client's going to come back to us 10 years from now and want to see all the images and stuff like that. Whereas if we are inside of a professional workflow, then we're going to look more like something like this, where our files are actually, hold on, better descriptor would be here. So you have your computer, you have your working drive here, so there's your working drive. It's being duplicated to that third copy to keep you safe. All the photos are in the job folder inside of that drive, and then each one has its own job, right? And then when you're done, then it looks more like that. You take all of the stuff from the job folder, this Jones job is going to now go into an archive drive by plugging it into one of these CRU units or whatever. Just plug in the archive drive of that current year, 2015, and then you just simply drag it onto that drive, and then you can get rid of it off your working drive so that you have more space for the new clients. Because quite frankly, your working drive should always be a situation where things come in, they get worked on, and they leave, just like they do in your working catalog. Okay? Things come into the train station, they get loaded up, they get changed, and then they leave. And then they come back in, get worked on, they leave. All right. So these schematics will help give you a kind of a bird's eye view as to what you should be doing. All right. So when we look at this workflow then, we export catalogs because we brought them in to our working catalog. And again, I'm going to show you how to do all of this. So we're just kind of giving you an idea of what we're going to talk about. So we have everything come into the working catalog, we work on it, and then we send it out. And we're going to send it out as its own catalog. So now instead of one big catalog with a bunch of jobs in it, it will be just a catalog with that one job in it sent out to the archive. And again, if you're personal, then you may not be doing this portion of the workflow because it's already done. Okay, when you send it out, what are you sending out? The first thing we're sending out is JPEGs. Those JPEGs are going to clients. If you're personal, it's not to clients, it's to Facebook, it's to maybe your iPhoto library, or maybe it's going on to your Apple TV or whatever. It's going to those places that you like to look at photos. But for those of us who have clients, it's going up. I use SmugMug, so it's going up to SmugMug, and then SmugMug is what's delivering it to my client. It's what's showing it to the client. It's what's allowing them to make prints. It allows me to look at them. It allows me to, you can make a portfolio out of it, so it can become your website. So SmugMug can become pretty much everything for you. It's also going onto my blog. So I'm going to be posting blog posts from it. I'm going to be sending it to Facebook. All those types of things are where it's going to go. The second place that it needs to go is it needs to go to my archive. So it needs to go to the archive. The archive is going to be where it sits and rests and waits for the client to come back wanting something. Now for me, when I am working with a client, I'm going to finish the shoot. I'm going to get through everything that I can possibly get through without the client's intervention. And that to me is considered delivered. So proof prints, proof books, adjustments, online, slideshows, things that I do not need the client's approval on. Then it goes to the archive, and it waits in the archive. Because I'm going to wait for the client to come back to me for whatever else they want, whether they want prints or whether they want an album or something like that. It needs to sit over in that archive. Because if I'm waiting for them, and that is filling up my hard drive, I could be waiting for a lot of different clients. And at one point, I'm going to fill up the hard drive, and then I'm going to have to go buy a new hard drive. I don't ever want that to occur. I want to have that. The hard drive that I'm working from needs to be as clean and as limited a number of jobs as possible. And so I'm going to get it to the archive where I wait for the client. All right? Most of my deliverables are done. I'm just waiting for them to approve an album or something like that. Okay. Then the final place that they're going to go is to my portfolio. I got to deliver them to my portfolio because remember, I'm going to take all of these images. This is in a professional workflow. All of them are going to go onto an archive drive, which means once I pull that archive drive and detach it from the system, I'm no longer going to see those images. So that means I need to take my favorite images and I need to put them into a portfolio drive because the portfolio drive is always going to be attached. I'm always going to have access to my portfolio drive. So once I plug in the portfolio drive, I'm good to go. I can look through anything that I've shot over the past 10, 20 years but I'm only looking at the good stuff, the best stuff, the stuff that I will use. Okay? All right. So that is the total workflow. Once it's all done, and I've gotten all of my stuff to the archive, and I've put stuff on my portfolio drive, and I've sent it off to the client, and I'm kind of waiting. At that point, I can go to the working drive, so I can go to this drive here, and if this were the job that we were finishing, I could take that job and delete it. And that frees up space for the next job to come in. But part of that process is that I have to confirm the copy. I confirm the copy with a program called Delta Walker. Delta Walker simply compares the folder that you copied from to the folder you copied to, and it makes sure every 1 and 0 is in place. Once it's done that, it can say that is a perfect copy, you're fine. And then you can delete the first copy because the second copy is exactly the same. It's important to make sure you confirm those copies. All right? That is the workflow. Any questions about the workflow?
We do have a question. Isn't it easier and more automated to import from a card with Lightroom with all your copyright presets, etc.? Would that be easier?
No. We're confusing importing with transferring. So the first process is to transfer images from the card to the computer. The computer can transfer 4, 5, 10 cards at a time, at the same time. Lightroom can transfer 1. So if I want to sit and babysit for 10 cards, then yes, then Lightroom's fine. But I don't want to sit around and babysit for 10 cards. I want to be importing 4 cards, doing something else, come back, put in 4 more, do something else. Okay? Now, I'm a wedding photographer, so I shoot a lot of images. If I'm a travel photographer, I would shoot a lot of images. But if I'm only shoot senior portraits, or if I only shoot artwork or something like that, and I only have 1 card, then that's easy enough. Lightroom's fine, if you know where the photos are going. If you don't know where the photos are going, I can guarantee you it's better to do it yourself. And the only reason, I mean, if you are a master at file organization and you know where Lightroom's sending your images, great. But if you don't know, if you're a little iffy on it, even kind of iffy on it, then do it yourself so you know where they are, so you never run in. So many times I run into friends that are like, I don't know where any of my photos are. And it's because they just plugged in a card, Lightroom popped up, and they said, okay, do whatever you want to do with it. And they never told Lightroom what to do. That's where you get into danger, because you don't know where anything is. I can find where it is because I know what I'm doing, but you can't. And so, if you're in that circumstance, just make sure that you're putting your photos where they go, where you want them to go. And if you don't want to use any of these hard drive systems, you just want to put them in your pictures folder, great. Do it, but put them where they're supposed to be in your mind so that you always know this is where they're going to be. My mom is the perfect example of someone who doesn't know where anything is on her computer. She has no idea because she lets the computer do all the work. And so she has no idea where anything is, which means she can never find it. But if she would institute a program where every time I put a photo somewhere, I don't put it somewhere new, I put it in this spot, then it would work out. My wife is this way when it comes to like the house. Everything has a particular spot. We have a little dongle, this little thing right here that allows us to connect an iPad to a TV screen or whatever. There is a box on a shelf for this. Just this. Just that. But guess who can always find that dongle? I'm like searching through bags or whatever, and she has one of these dongles, and she will always know where that is. She can go and find it because there's a box for it. So physically, my wife is exactly the same way as I am digitally. in the digital realm make boxes, and things go in boxes, and they stay in those boxes, and they don't leave those boxes. To wit, everything inside of your job, so if I'm going to go to a wedding, then everything having to do with that wedding is going to be inside of that job. So if I go to a portrait, you can see that I've got catalogs, I've got raw images, I've got slideshows, studio interviews, I've got clips of things, everything for that job. Even if you do physical contracts or whatever, they go inside of this folder. Everything to do with the job goes in that folder. If you have notes that you're taking before the wedding, they go into this folder. If your client sends you pictures of themselves, they go into that folder. Everything goes in that folder, so that the box, you just pull it off the shelf and you can find it, right? Okay, I've got 2 questions. You first, and then...
Okay. Jared, I think you just answered part of my question. You're creating a catalog for every client, basically, and then are you deleting it out of your working catalog, or how does that work?
So, the nutshell version is all the images for that client go in a folder for that client. They all go into the working catalog and they get worked on. When they're done, the information goes into a catalog into that folder with the images, and then that folder goes to the archive and gets deleted from the working drive. Is that fairly clear?
And you take it out of the working catalog too?
Yes,
Okay.
it'll go out of that as well. And we'll show all of that to you. We're going to go through the whole process. So no one out there, especially out there on the internet, don't go Google-eyed on me yet. I'm giving you the 30,000-foot view, and then we're going to go in over the next 3 days, and we're going to work on all of these processes and put it together so you can see each one of those processes happening right in front of you.
So you're talking about file management. You've got in-camera redundancy, CF and SD.
Mm-hmm.
I imagine that you're keeping or creating a different folder or box, one for an SD card, one for a compact flash card. Is that right?
Well, remember, each one goes into its own card. I don't care what it is.
Okay.
Like I just literally pile a bunch of cards and I just ingest them all. Because Lightroom sorts out what they are. It knows that this is a JPEG, this is a RAW, this is a, and this was shot at this time, that was shot at this time. So it figures all that out. All I need to do is get them into that box, that folder that's the RAW folder where all the photos go. Now, when I'm shooting a wedding, I'm shooting a RAW and a JPEG. That way I can take the SD card and hand it to my assistant. He can plug it into the laptop and ingest the JPEGs from the day and make a slideshow. Okay, so I'm doing that. Incidentally, did you know that a small RAW image is less expensive size-wise than a JPEG? Which means that you could actually shoot a small RAW on the SD card and you get more out of it, and once you're done with the slideshow, you're also done with some of the editing on the photos. And so just recently, after I discovered that my small RAWs were smaller than my JPEGs, I just started shooting small RAWs on my SD card, big RAWs on my CF card, so that now I can ingest those really quickly and work on them. Plus, if I'm shooting tethered, don't shoot so if you're shooting tethered, if you tell whatever card your camera is viewing, that's the image that's going to be transferred with the tether. So don't make that card for the longest time I thought, well, a JPEG is going to be smaller than RAW, so I made a JPEG, and then I was transferring a JPEG, and it just takes forever to transfer it because it's USB 2. And so I was like, oh gosh. So then I changed it to a small RAW. Transfers just like that because it's such a small file, but it has all the raw data, so it looks the best. You can really do what you would do to it, whereas a JPEG, it's always kind of a fake looking, it's not real. So yeah.
This might be a little bit beyond where you're trying to take us, but it looks to me like this is not just photos with the file structure and everything. This is like your entire business file structure.
Yes.
Just to be more clear on that.
Everything in the business follows this. So everything goes here. And at the end of the day, when I archive this job, I want all information about this client to be in that folder so that I can always go back. And you're going to come back to me 3 years later and say, hey, you shot my wedding on January in 2012 or something like that. Can you find it? Yeah, what was the date of the wedding? Well, you know what day your wedding was, I hope. If you don't, you're in trouble. So if you know that date, it's very easy for you to tell me the date. I don't even have to know your name. I know the date. I go, oh, there's a wedding on that date. It must be, whoever. And so then I open it up, and I know everything that I ever knew about you. Got all the notes from the wedding. I've got all of the information. I've got model releases if I had you sign model releases. I've got everything inside that file. Which incidentally, if you're shooting stuff where you're shooting model releases, your model releases need to go in here too. That way, if anyone ever comes to you and says, hey, you're using my photo and blah, 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 and you say, oh, well, you signed a model release. Because you can look at the it's in your portfolio. You look at the file and you know what day it was shot, so just go back to that day in the archive and open it up, and there's your model release. So you can also put that model release as a JPEG in your portfolio, so it'll sit right next to the photo. So that's also an interesting policy.
This is sort of a business question about how your business files integrate with a particular client.
Mm-hmm.
So let's say for your business contracts for a wedding,
Mm-hmm.
do you add contracts, say, into the same Lightroom file, or do you?
Well, remember, Lightroom can't see documents. It
Right.
sees photos. And so I have a system online. So I'm using an online contracting system. But at the very end of the job, I can simply take all of that and print it out to a file, and it'll print it to a PDF file. And that PDF just goes into the final file.
Not into your Lightroom file, into
It just
a
goes
separate
into
file.
this folder.
The same folder.
The same folder, so that later on, if I open it up, let's say that system, I'm no longer using it or whatever, if that system is no longer in use and I'm using some other system, I wouldn't have access to all of the information from those weddings. So park a PDF of everything that you've done inside of the final job. That's just part of what you got to do. All right?